Hey everybody, this is Barrett Gruber with the All About Nothing podcast. Want to thank you very much for listening. This is awesome that you're here. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there that you could potentially be listening to, but you're here. I don't know why, but you're here. Thank you. If you could, please go ahead and subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. As well, if you could give us one of those 5-star ratings if it's available, or a thumbs up, or whatever it is that your software allows. We use that information. It drives us up in the ratings so that people will find us under a search a little quicker. That would be great. Thank you. Also want to say this episode is with Trevor Lane of the Man Tools podcast out of Colorado Springs. And it is important to note that he and I have different opinions on different things, as well as we also express ourselves in different ways. There may be some information here that you hear that is potentially different from how you feel or how I feel. And it's important to note that there are lots of opinions across this country, across this world, and we have to recognize that. But the only way to somehow come together is we have to figure out how to talk about it and come to a compromise, because ultimately one group isn't going to be able to have say over the other. When we can do that, that's when we will be able to find the ability to come up with solutions for all of these things that we currently are debating over. So, with that said, go ahead and get the show started.
Recorded live from the Maddie Johnson podcast studio at GOT Sound Studio in Columbia, South Carolina, this is the All About Nothing podcast. The views expressed on this program are the opinions of the host. Some content and subject matter may not be appropriate. Listener discretion is advised. Listeners are encouraged to follow the show at theallaboutnothing.com for links to social media and more. Listeners can call the show at 803-672-0533. Thank you for listening.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the All About Nothing podcast. This is episode 115, and my guest this week is Trevor Lane, half of the duo from the Man Tool podcast and Livestream, available across the podcast spectrum, as well as live streaming. The Man Tools podcast is a weekly men's issue program that tackles a comedic approach to news, sports, history, and everything else that comes up. Along with Eric Madrid, the two of them have been passionate about developing boys into good men since 1994, when they first met as counselors at a Boy Scout camp in Colorado. So that's 25 years of evolution to bring you what the Man Tools podcast and live stream is. Welcome very much, Trevor, to the All About Nothing podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is exciting because just in the last couple of weeks, we actually did a podcast with someone that was from Massachusetts, a state where marijuana is legal, and now another state where marijuana is legal, and South Carolina is still falling behind, well behind.
Yeah.
So, listen, this is great though. I actually have family that lives in Aspen. They live adjacent to Aspen. I'll just say they live adjacent to Aspen. So, being in Boy Scouts,
I was gonna say that's a high-end town.
Yeah, like I said, adjacent to Aspen. I'm not even quite certain that their address is Aspen, but that, you know. So the reason that Trevor's here today is because in his work experience, Trevor has worked in a pawn shop that sold firearms. And I know lately that that's a subject that has come up more and more, especially after the Uvalde school shooting. And there's always this discussion about how the best approach to potentially coming up with some sort of laws or rules and whatnot when it comes to gun responsibility. And I think that part of that comes down to is the responsibility of the sale of firearms. And your experience having worked in a pawn shop, you all sold firearms, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the bulk of our sales were firearms and jewelry. So, yeah. In
Colorado, what is... So, I can tell you. So, in South Carolina, in order to purchase a firearm, you have to have either a concealed weapons permit, or be subjected to the NICS background check, whether it's the instant background check or it's the e-check. And there are rumors that from time to time, here in South Carolina, if the gun dealer cannot get a hold of anyone to do the background check, that after 2 phone calls or 2 busy signals, that they're allowed to just go ahead and sell the firearm. That is a rumor. I don't have any evidence to back that up. No one in South Carolina wanted to talk about it. After all, our attorney general here in South Carolina literally owns gun stores here in South Carolina. So I feel like it would probably be it would go against his better judgment to talk to us. But in Colorado, in your experience, is that something that you had? Was there ever a time when you attempted to make phone calls or do an e-check where it just wasn't available?
Not that I can recall, but I from what I remember of my training, I'm pretty sure that violates federal law. That the requirement is to do the background check.
Yeah.
Like, if it can't be done, the gun can't be sold. That's what I recall from all of my training.
Yeah,
I don't remember anyone ever, and to be honest, back then it seemed like the system was less bogged down than it seems to be now.
Sure. Sure.
They've made some changes, and so it seemed like back then they came back a lot quicker. The last time I bought a gun, I couldn't pick it up until the day after. That's how long it took to get the background check back.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
But that wasn't because of a mandatory waiting period. That was because it.
No.
Okay. Is there a waiting period?
Not in Colorado.
Not in Colorado.
No. And there is no federal waiting period.
Right.
And then, states do what states do,
Oh, yeah.
until they're challenged in court.
Yeah. And in fact, in South Carolina, so we do have rules as far as who can purchase firearms. Obviously, you have to pass this background check or already have a concealed weapons permit. But like firearms in South Carolina, you can't own machine guns, obviously. You can't own sawed-off shotguns or sawed-off rifles. In South Carolina, you cannot own military rifles or firearms, but the line is drawn sort of thinly on that one because you can own AR-15s, which if someone is building them at home, then there's no check on that. If they go and they build their own AR-15 out of the pieces that they order off the internet and build it into what potentially could be military, and that's the other thing is that military style doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rifle that fires off 3 rounds every time you pull the trigger. It's because of the attachments and whatnot that make it a military style. Is that correct?
Well, I would point out, because I've gotten into this argument, especially lately, and I've asked people, name me a country that issues the AR-15 to their soldiers. The answer is none. So the idea of calling an AR-15 a military or weapon of war, I've heard that thrown around a lot, is kind of a misnomer. It looks scary, but it's actually no different. A good comparison is if you were to Google right now, the Mini 14, a very common rifle. It comes in 2 cosmetic packages. One is the fixtures are all wood, and I believe they call that the ranch model. A lot of like cattle ranchers really like it. It's good for shooting coyotes. It's very similar to an AR-15 as far as how it functions. It's in the .223 caliber or 5.56 millimeter. It has a detachable magazine, but once you get the one where it's black plastic, people lose their minds. They're like, and it just looks different. It doesn't function any differently. It just looks scarier to people that aren't familiar with, how the gun operates.
And as long as it's not been manipulated, I assume that it's a one pull, one shot, one trigger.
Right. And that's the, the thing that the concern, I guess, for people building at home is, if you're building it at home, to be honest, once you buy it, there's nothing stopping you from modifying it so that it could be fully automatic.
Right.
I don't know how hard that is. I haven't even Googled it, but my understanding is it's not terribly hard. You remove a couple parts or switch a couple parts out, and then bam, it's a what the ATF calls a machine gun.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is something I don't like. My listeners are typically going to be more on the liberal side, and they're probably going to be the type that would probably lean more towards this idea that if it's military-esque, then it probably doesn't need to be in the hands of a civilian. And while I agree that the civilians don't need military weapons or military style weapons, I believe, like you mentioned, the idea that if you are having to defend, and in Colorado, this is you're out west. There's the tendency that there are people out there that own land that could potentially cattle or whatever it is that they're raising could potentially come under the harm of some prey or some animal that just wants to prey on them. And I can imagine a scenario where having a firearm that had distance to cover, as well as the potential of at least spraying more rounds into the air to potentially hit something rather than just angering it is probably necessary.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, I recently watched a video. I don't remember what state it was. I don't think it was Colorado. It might have been New Mexico or something, but it was a rancher, and he shot over the course of this night. It's like a night vision recording, because coyotes are nocturnal. They
Right.
come out at night. Right. And he had this problem where coyotes kept preying on his cows. So he decided to set up at night, and he shot, I think the total count was like 30 coyotes that he shot over the course of this night. This crazy, just large pack of coyotes was just, laying waste to his cattle. If it wasn't for him sitting there with, I don't know what kind of gun it was, but it was definitely some form of semi-automatic rifle with, I don't know what the magazine capacity was. I couldn't tell exactly when he reloaded, but by the end of the video, he had shot like 30 of these coyotes, and they just kept coming.
Man,
it was nuts.
and to clarify, semi-automatic again does not necessarily mean that you're firing off multiple rounds with one pull of the trigger. That means is that the previous round is ejected, a new round is automatically made available to then again pull the trigger. So
yeah, and that's. The other way is fully automatic. That's where you can just hold the trigger and it sprays bullets until you let go, or until it runs out.
Almost completely inaccurately. I can't.
Yeah.
I think typically after like one or two rounds in a fully automatic situation, the gun is not nearly pointed at the same location it was. And I have plenty of friends in the military that would attest to the fact that their first round was always more accurate than their 15th. So
yeah. In fact, that's why the military went to the 3-round burst version of the M16.
Right.
It was a lesson learned from Vietnam, because the original version you could just spray, and as they call it, spray and pray. And they found that that was not combat, or at least not as combat effective as restricting it to 3 rounds per trigger pull. So
and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just if you've ever operated any sort of rifle like an M16 or an M4 or anything like that, that is the idea that you could potentially control a firearm that's constantly pushing back on you while it's also firing out the other end, and just having any control. I cannot imagine a scenario where anyone with any sort of intelligence would recognize that's a possibility.
And to be honest, the way that those big machine guns are used, like the M60 or even the M2 50 caliber machine gun, it's not so much to inflict a bunch of casualties. It's more to disrupt the operation of the enemy unit.
Sure.
So you're going to put your head down and stop doing whatever you were doing once those rounds start flying.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily to accurately hit a bunch of people. The kind of other application is to wreck equipment, which it's very good at. You start hitting a truck with that. A truck's a big target. You're probably not going to miss even with a machine gun.
Right.
And it's not going to roll after you're done with it,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. According to the cliche, it's hard to hit some people have a hard time hitting the broadside of a barn. So that's not moving. So another one of the reasons I wanted to speak with someone that had experience selling firearms. In your experience, did you ever have situations where you had to turn someone away because of the laws that were in place? Did you ever have to? Did individuals fail the background check that you had to turn away?
We sure did. That happened, and not terribly regularly.
Yeah,
but it happened occasionally, and a lot of times they get upset and well, fuck you. I'm walking down the street, and I'm like, they're gonna ping the same computer system and get the same result. You need to resolve this with the ATF.
Right.
Maybe you are telling me the truth that this, this is inaccurate, but until you resolve that with the ATF, there's nothing I can do. If they come back and say no, it's no.
Right.
That's it.
In that situation, and obviously the people are going to deny that they should be denied in a situation like that. What is it that have you ever gotten sort of an impression of someone that maybe this is an individual that I shouldn't be selling a firearm to?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
No.
That's
most, and it's interesting because it's a pawn shop, right? So, to be honest, the more frequent thing was us taking in stuff where I'm like, I think this might be stolen.
I see. Sure.
So, and here's the interesting thing with it being a pawn shop. If you pawn a firearm, you have to pass the background check to get it back. So when you redeem your loan, it's the same as if we were going to sell you a gun.
Gotcha.
You have to pass that background check to take possession of what was originally your gun back. I ran into that a couple of times where somebody didn't pass and they're like, this is bullshit. It's mine. And I'm like, well, if you don't, I'm like, if you look, you can pay the interest and extend the loan so you have some more time to resolve your issues with the ATF. But as long as the ATF says no, I can't give this to you. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's one of those scenarios where one of the questions I had was in a situation where you and obviously this is going to be a hypothetical, but in a situation where you potentially felt like this person is here to buy this gun, it feels like there is something else going on. In your training, was there anything that would have assisted you in potentially subverting the sale or potentially I don't know, somehow maybe potentially recognizing some signs that someone may not be in their right mind and this could potentially turn into a crime?
Well, in my case, I worked at a corporate chain.
Okay.
So their thing was, we're here to make money. If they pass the background check, you make the sale. The end. Now, other shops, look, obviously some of this stuff varies state to state. In Colorado, a shop can, not even for guns, for anything, they can refuse service for whatever reason they feel like. So under the law, they had that discretion, but our training was this company is here to make money. If they pass the background check, you make the sale.
Gotcha.
The end. So
regardless of so then the follow up to that would be, did you ever feel like there was enough that you observed that you felt like maybe I shouldn't have made this sale?
No, I can't remember anything like that. No.
That's so in South Carolina, unfortunately, we had the Dylan Roof situation where clearly it sounds as though, because the gun was actually purchased not 2 miles from here, the gun that he used to kill the 9 parishioners at the Emmanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, it seems as though, based on some of the stories that came out that were unreported, but just because word of mouth and if you live within 2 miles of a place, you know someone that at least knows someone that works there. And
right.
There was a definite sense that this Dylan Roof had something going on, and that the likelihood of him making these purchases was not in, I don't know what to say as far as the word, but he may have not been in the right mental state. And then the end result is, within 24 hours, he drives to Charleston, South Carolina, sits in a Bible study class with the 9 individuals that he then murders. And it's so that's one of those situations where, with the potential of there being gun legislation that is eventually, I don't know if it's going to come or not, but my hope is that there is some sort of responsibility put into place, not necessarily the responsibility of the individual selling the firearms, because there's already responsibility put into place. You have to be licensed. You have to, I assume there's certifications that you have to maintain. But in South Carolina, we have loopholes here that unfortunately it has created a booming black market in firearms, which, until I started doing the research, I had no idea just how available buying a handgun was. And in South Carolina, our legislature hasn't closed any of the unlicensed sale loopholes either. Because if you go to if you happen to get a table at one of the gun shows, it sounds like at South Carolina that you could actually walk in, purchase a firearm from one of those individuals who's not a dealer, but just someone that's bought a table to sell the firearms that they have or buy firearms. But that there's virtually no check on that. So,
well, that's interesting because I've been to a number of gun shows here, and the way it typically works is you make your sale, you negotiate your sale anyways with the dealer, and then they have a computer there, and they do a background check. Like there is no, like when I hear about this gun show loophole, I've not seen it. My observation has been they do a background check. You don't get to walk out of that show with your firearms until it happens. So, but I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak for other states. Sure. I can only speak for what I've seen.
Sure. And again, this is information that's based on the availability of what winds up being. So, the only way to actually enforce that here in South Carolina is to literally have someone walking around and monitoring every sale that's made, which doesn't happen in a gun show. You have individuals that do attempt to do some sort of monitoring, but it's South Carolina at times. I'd like to think that we'll eventually crawl out of the Stone Age or the Iron Age maybe at some point, but we're still here. It's also important to note that the shooter in Uvalde, Salvador Ramos, he purchased both of the AR rifles that were used in the shooting legally in Colorado. I mean, in Texas. Sorry. Based
now,
on,
if I'm not, I can't remember if it's him or the Buffalo shooter, but one of them, it's come out now that they did lie on the form, but it wasn't caught. Well, so yeah, they said like, no, I've never been treated for mental illness or whatever the question was, and then it turns out that's not correct. So they went through the process, but apparently there was a flaw in the process.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not sure which one that was. I had read something about that. Honestly, it was on a TikTok, and they didn't indicate which one it was, but just the importance of red flag laws that could have potentially attached to his Social Security number as part of his background check. But if Ramos had made those firearm purchases here in South Carolina, he would have been able to without any issue either. Because we also the background check here is the same as in all the other states, but it doesn't have I think what it needs to potentially catch individuals that could have something wrong, that could have had some sort of bout with mental illness, which kind of leads me to part of what I also want to discuss with you as far as not necessarily from a political standpoint, but just you have children. I have children. Mm-hmm. Your children are in public school, I assume.
Yeah.
My children are homeschooled, and one of the reasons that my children are homeschooled wasn't necessarily because of the fear of a shooter coming into the school. The fear that we had was almost on a daily basis. We would get text messages from the sheriff's department or from sort of law enforcement related to proximity to the school, where we were told there was a bomb threat. And I don't know how often this happens everywhere else, but sometimes it just seems like there's a trend, like it trends up. We have all of these indications of a potential bomb threats at schools all over the Midlands here in South Carolina, and then all of a sudden the trend dies down, and then the trend goes back up. And I think from our standpoint as parents, we got to the point where it was, this is too much. My wife has a degree in education, and my son is of an age that he can learn on his own. He's part of an online course with the county now, but so that was really part of the decision making, that we brought him home to learn, rather than, because bomb threats are disruptive to the school, and if it's happening on a weekly basis, then how does the school control that in that situation, and how do they control the learning environment? So one of the things that I believe is probably something that needs to come out of all of this, and this is my opinion, is not necessarily the turning schools into a prison, and with the hardening of the schools, but we have the technology to take and modernize these schools in a way to protect the students by not making the students feel that they're under constant lock and key, that there's armed shooters on the roofs in case somebody tries to make a run on the school or things like that. We use this type of technology on military bases to protect offices that are important. with doors that seal. Well, banks have automatic doors that close and seal at the first touch of a button.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. From what I understand, after Columbine, there was I'm pretty sure it's a federal law, or it may be one of those, like, if you want Department of Education money, you have to do this thing. But my understanding was, and this is one of the things that got brought up at Parkland, was because apparently, and even this most recent school shooting, was they're supposed to have it set up where there's only one door open during the day, and it's supposed to only be able to be open from the inside.
Right.
In the case of the Parkland shooting, they apparently took the money that the Department of Education was doling out and never made the required upgrades.
Sure.
In the case of Uvalde, I guess there was a teacher, I should say a school employee. I don't know if she was a teacher, but somebody propped the door open to, like, go on a smoke break or something, and that's part of how he was able to gain entry to the school. Was it was propped open because this person wanted to exit the school and not have to deal with ringing the buzzer and getting let back in.
Well, and to be honest with you, I can absolutely see how that could happen, because if someone did go out the door to take a smoke break or something like that, there was a shootout before he even entered the school. I mean, he was being chased by police, and it's almost
because he shot his grandma in the face.
Yeah. She's still holding on too, apparently. I don't know what state, but she's apparently holding on. But yeah, that's one of those things that, like, I know with the elementary school that my son was in, and then the middle school, the idea was, and I can't verify it, but the idea is that you could only come through the front entrance of the school to enter the school, whether it was for normal school hours, the students came in through the same door, or it was just if you were coming in as a visitor. And if you came in as a visitor, you had to check in. But, like, even to enter the school, you would come in the far door and then would literally have to walk down a path that was only 15, 25 feet long, but you would have to go then into another door. And every one of these doors, if it was glass, it was reinforced glass with wire, so that a bullet may be able to penetrate it, but it's not going to turn the glass into a bunch of it's not going to turn the glass into a bunch of shrapnel. And then there were steel doors between. I mean, there was 1, 2, 3 steel doors before you could actually enter into the school past the office. So sure, the opportunity was there that you could potentially turn the office into a murder scene, but at least that was as far as you could potentially go without somebody allowing you through, because it was a system of buttons that had to engage that door and disengage. So and obviously in Valdi that didn't happen here. I guess I wind up coming back to the same thing, though. We do have technology that we could potentially improve our schools. If and I say this on my show often enough, but I think that we're not at war right now, technically. I don't see any reason why we could not use funding that's being used in the military. 1, take care of the veterans, and 2, improve the veteran system. But 2, maybe subvert a few $1 billion out of that to upgrade and update the security systems for school systems that would be more responsive without human intervention. And
I would agree. And I think the flip to that, though, is there also needs to be, I don't know, maybe kind of, do you remember the blood on the pavement type videos that you'd have to watch in school?
I do.
Like drinking and driving. Look, hammer it into this staff. You cannot prop that fucking door open.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't care what you're doing. Show them videos of school shootings. This is what you're opening us up for. And maybe even, I hate to, we will hold you personally responsible if it's because the door's
absolutely.
open.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? You're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
If we have a shooting here and it's because you held the door open, you're going to go to prison just like the shooter.
Yeah, in my mind, there's no reason why a jury cannot find someone guilty of aiding in a criminal act, even if they didn't knowingly do it. You still aided in it. So I feel like there's justification for actually having some sort of repercussions for a situation like that. Yeah, absolutely. The other part of that also leads to is one of the things that really gripes me, and I know that the right in politics uses it against the left, and they use the word control. Gun control is a term that was shopped around, and it got the most reaction out of both the left and the right when it came to this idea of, when it comes to gun control, using the word control is a subversive way of saying that you are going to be controlled under, regardless of the rights that are afforded to you by the Second Amendment, that the word gun control will make you feel like you are having to submit. And I would prefer, and I know it's not me that's running for office or me out there that's promoting this, but I think that the only way to really improve our situation isn't to call it gun control, but to call it gun responsibility, gun responsibility sales, and gun responsibility ownership. And you may feel completely different about this, but I think that one of the things that's necessary is and I know the argument always is, well, the Bill of Rights is what gives us the Second Amendment, which gives us the right to bear arms. And when I say, well, you also have the responsibility to have insurance on your vehicle when you drive. If someone were to institute the idea that you had to submit and maintain insurance on owning the firearms that you did, is that something in Colorado that you think would fly?
In our current rather left-leaning political climate, I think it would. What I find interesting, a number of years ago, there was legislation passed here for magazine capacity limits. It brought the limit down. I guess there was no limit, and it brought it down to 10 rounds per magazine. And we had a big recall. I voted for the recall. I wanted to recall them. I didn't think a magazine limit was, I thought it was an idiotic idea because you can just carry more magazines.
Right.
But
no, I think that's always been the argument. Yeah.
So we did this recall and got new people in there, but they never changed the law. And I'm like, well, what's the fucking point of the recall if, I don't even think a bill was proposed to reverse the law. It was like, what the shit? So we got these, we got rid of the quote bad guys and brought in these new people, and they didn't reverse the law. So, I would say the political climate here would be conducive to, and I could see it coming, tightening up on a lot of stuff. Yeah.
All right, Nothingers, I want to cue you in about a friend of the pod, Blank Canvas Brand. If you own a business or restaurant and the time has come to build that unique brand, you have got to get a hold of Blank Canvas Brand. Blank Canvas Brand specializes in brand identity, including logos, business cards, flyers, and anything else to promote your business. And now, Blank Canvas Brand offers printing services to help with your clothing needs, including sports teams. I can tell you from our own experience, Blank Canvas Brand is responsible for our logo, as well as the Bowl of Duty bowling team logo, and we couldn't be happier with what's been produced. For more information, you can search Facebook for Blank Canvas, or you can email Blank Canvas at theallaboutnothing.com. That's BLNKCANVS at theallaboutnothing.com. You can find links in the Friends of the Pod section of our website. Visit theallaboutnothing.com. Hey everyone, I want to take a quick moment to mention one of our new sponsors, thepaintedmoment.com. That's thepaintedmoment.com. Check this out. Have you ever taken a photo with your phone or digital camera that would look amazing as a watercolor canvas painting? Well, now there's a website ready to take your photo and turn it into digital painted moments. This is how it works. Visit thepaintedmoment.com, follow the instructions, and your digital photo will be enhanced and returned to you with links on where you can have an image printed to canvas or whatever else you'd like to do with it. We've already got a couple of these enhanced photos hanging around the house, and trust me, you'll love what comes out. Thepaintedmoment.com. Create a painted moment in time from your digital photos. Thepaintedmoment.com. Seriously, check them out today. Thepaintedmoment.com. We have to thank our sponsor, GOT Sound Studio, and its owner and operator, Dominique Stewart, better known as Neek the Geek. GOT Sound Studios offers a variety of recording experiences from music, voice, and instrumental recordings and production, as well as podcasts. GOT Sound Studio is located in Columbia, South Carolina, and operated by the most talented producer and engineer in the business. GOT Sound Studio is a Black-owned business. Bring your recording business needs here. You can find details on their Facebook page or by calling 803 888-243-2302 or emailing gotsounds@theallaboutnothing.com. That's gotsounds@theallaboutnothing.com. You can find links in the Friends of the Pod section of our website. Visit theallaboutnothing.com.
Hello out there in podcast world. I am the dad who dabs. My name is The Diligent Dabber. I am a cannabis enthusiast, patient, product reviewer, and I also make educational videos on YouTube. I have always promoted individual empowerment when it comes to people's experiences with cannabis. My show is a mixture of cannabis news, dad life, industry insider knowledge, and of course, dabs. Join me as I traverse the intricacies of life, the universe, and everything on The Dad Who Dabs. Find it on Spotify with a bonus video version available on YouTube.
Hi, this is Shiana, host of Who You Callin' Holistic, and you're listening to the All About Nothing podcast.
I think one of the things that winds up coming up as an idea as well is, and I hear it mentioned a little bit more and more even here in South Carolina, is some sort of national private database that keeps a record of serial numbers to owners. And it's not something that would ever be publicly available. It's just, like
here's something I find interesting, because they say that they don't have that. But when you do the form 4473 for the ATF for a background check, it requires you putting that all on there. But then they go, we don't keep a record of it. And I'm like, well, then why is it on the form?
Right. That's a good question.
I don't, I suspect that they are secretly keeping these records, because otherwise, why would it go on the form? They say, well, that's for the dealer's records. I'm like, well, the dealer can keep their own fucking records. I mean, if they want to keep a record of serial numbers that have been sold by their shop, they can do that.
Yeah.
But to put it on the form, it's like, what are you doing with this if you're not keeping the record? Oh,
well, and that's a great question. Well, because there is actually, and I can't remember where, and it was on the Daily Show, and this ran a couple years ago. It was after another shooting, but they ran this on there and indicated that there is a building that is not connected to the internet, that is doesn't contain modern computer system like computers that are capable. It's like a mainframe system that they have, but everything in there is paperwork. And I think what it does is it comes down to when there's an investigation into a shooting or something like that, or someone has been shot, that the law enforcement will then send a request to this facility to ask for a match on, say, a round. The problem is that matching sometimes takes months and months, because the Congress has made the decision that this facility will not have a modern database in how it looks up this information. So they've handicapped that potential system of just for law enforcement, just to match identical gun rounds that were used potentially in a crime. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They do take down the serial number, and then where does it go from there? In your experience in working in a pawn shop that sold firearms, I assume you all had to submit that paperwork. I assume it didn't just sit at the store.
Well, so I was not management, and the way our procedure worked was, if someone was buying a gun, I would have them fill out the form, and I would look at it and make sure there wasn't like a block not filled in, or that sort of thing. And the manager would actually submit it. So I don't know if this is back, like you'd have to sit there and type the stuff from the form. You didn't scan it or anything like that. So I don't know if once he logged into the NIC system, if he typed in the serial numbers and stuff. But it was like, whenever I hear that they're not keeping that, it's like, well, you do have it put down on the form, and the gun dealers are required, I forget the number of years, but they're required to keep those forms for a certain number of years.
Gotcha. In
case of something where they want to look it up. So yeah, maybe it's not going to the ATF until something happens, but at least at the local level, that's definitely being recorded and held on to for a certain period of time.
Yeah, I'll be honest. That's one of those things that seems to come out pretty quickly after a shooting like this, is that almost immediately they know where the firearms were purchased from. So there's potentially something there that's keeping track of it. But
in fact, the company I worked for stopped selling handguns because one of their handguns was used in Columbine.
Wow.
And that's something else I have to point out. when we talk about banning assault weapons and stuff because of school shootings, Columbine happened during Clinton's assault weapons ban.
Right.
And it was no less deadly because there weren't assault weapons involved. You know, I use that in quotes. I think that's one of those boogeyman type terms that gets thrown around. It's not an assault weapon until you decide to assault somebody with it.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
You know, just because it looks scary and it's black doesn't make it functionally any more deadly than, another type of gun. But, Columbine, the assault weapons ban under Clinton went from 94 to 2004, and then it expired and wasn't re-upped or whatever.
Right.
And Columbine happened in 1997, 98. So it was like right in the middle of that ban. And there were no assault weapons involved in that shooting.
Right.
So,
that's
I'm not sure.
That's something that's probably overlooked when it comes to, the statistics and the facts when because the assault weapons ban it did have a positive effect in the sense that there were fewer rifles being imported into the United States that were potentially being used that could have been purchased and sold. But the argument there is, well, what about the ones that are already out on the street? That's the situation with that is that in the situation where those are used as a crime, where someone is, if regardless of whether there's a victim, if there is a rifle or a handgun that is used in a crime, at least in South Carolina, those weapons are then taken into the custody of the sheriff's department until some sort of judicial decision has been made on the crime, and then there's differing information on what is done with those firearms after that situation has been completed.
Right.
There is information from the South Carolina Department of I can't remember what our department is. It's SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, that indicates that those firearms are destroyed. There is also in some towns and places, there's rumors that those firearms are then not used, but they are then they are placed into the market to benefit the money that's coming into, say, a small city town police office. Like in South Carolina, we have towns. Some of them only have 1,200 people. I'm sure Colorado's the same.
Right.
They're small, but they have a police department that enforces, and their budget's not huge. So in a situation where they could potentially add one of those firearms to their arsenal, or potentially turn around and sell it so that they can get, locks for their doors or replace a vehicle, that sort of thing. So there are reasons to believe that those potential weapons could make it back out into the public where they could be used for another crime. And that's
I think it also depends on the disposition of the case.
Sure.
If the defendant is found not guilty, and I've seen kind of secondhand where this happens, and I can explain the scenario a little more, but it can take. Eventually, you're supposed to get your property back if you've been found not guilty of the
Sure.
crime that you've been accused of. So, but it can take a long time. I know someone who he had a power of attorney because the wife just did not want to deal with this. A friend of his committed suicide with a pistol. So that was taken into evidence until they made sure that it wasn't some kind of foul play. They ruled it a suicide. And she just didn't, she's like, I don't want it. You take it, you sell it, you do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
So he had this power of attorney to take possession of this gun after they finished. And he had that power of attorney the last time I talked to him, and I've since lost touch with him. It had been like 5 years. And supposedly this gun was going to be returned to now the guy with the power of attorney to take possession. But it's like, okay,
that's ridiculous.
Why? There's not an explanation for why other than just bureaucratic bullshit.
Right.
It's like,
right. Yeah, no, I agree. And in a situation like that, it doesn't make any sense. And from the aspect of him receiving that pistol back, who is it that he's the only one that can fight to get it back into his own hands? I assume. I mean, it's not like,
yeah, and he just had the power of attorney because the wife was like, they're going to try to return this at some point. I don't want it.
Yeah.
Here's a form so that you can take it and do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
And he honestly was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. He just did it because in her grief, she was like, well, this is coming back. I don't want it here. You have it.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not sure I want it.
No, in fact, I had a friend here in virtually the same situation that a family member actually planned this out to the T, and used a pistol to end his life after several years of fighting cancer, and basically just made the decision that he did not want to be a burden on his family anymore. He didn't want to have anything with dragging them down over the 2 decades, I think, that was involved. Went to, and this is graphic, but went to the trouble of wrapping himself in tarps, putting a phone book on the opposite side of the head, so that when he did it, there was no mess. But the pistol, so the pistol that he used, that friend actually came to me and said, they've cleared. And she received the pistol back, and then offered me the pistol, and I do enough speculating about ghosts and things like that, and how hauntings and whatever. So, and while I don't necessarily believe completely, sometimes maybe I'll just leave it off to the side just in case,
But, well, better not to tempt things, right?
Yeah.
Even if they don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. What else do you think? And again, I just want to remind everybody, we're speaking with Trevor Lane. He is one of the co-hosts from the podcast, the Man Tools podcast. And I'm sorry I haven't mentioned it more often.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, but when it comes to things that we can do that would potentially improve the situation, one of the things that I always hear is, it doesn't matter what laws you put in. There's enough guns out there that you can't fix this problem. There's nothing you can do. In my opinion, and I'll tell you what I think, and I mentioned the National Gun Registry as a potential a national private firearms registry. You could build it on the same infrastructure as you already have the Social Security system, which is completely private. I also think that bringing about a federal law that at least increases the age of potentially purchasing a firearm to 21 over 18. You can't buy cigarettes without being 21 now. You can't buy marijuana in states where it's legal unless you're 21. You can't buy alcohol federally unless you're 21. So why?
That's actually not true. There's not a federal law on alcohol.
Is it not? Oh, is it? But is
no.
it state?
You know
laws?
how that worked?
How does that work?
So the feds said, we want all states to be 21, and we're going to withhold federal funding for like highways if you don't do it. So all the states, of course, passed 21. Yeah. It's one of those like where they never did like a federal law that says this. They just went, well, if you want this money.
Yeah. Well, that's how where I went to high. So I grew up in Atlanta, and the school system that I grew up in did not have middle schools. But there was this study that was done that from the federal government decided that every school system across the country needed to adopt having middle schools, because having seniors in high schools with access to 8th graders, was not necessarily a great idea. So again, it was one of those situations where they said, well, if you don't switch, we're going to withhold the federal funding for your public education system.
Sure.
So not counting
but
alcohol.
My broad opinion on that is, let's decide what age we're adults and fucking stick to it.
Sure.
Like, because the flip to that is there are some Democrat politicians that are like, let's lower the voting age to 16. And I'm like, are you out of your fucking mind? Do you remember how you were when you were 16? Could you make a good decision? No. So the flip is, some of these same people are going, well, 21 for guns. And it's like, well, no, like, let's just decide, here's an age of adulthood. You have all the legal rights and privileges that go along with that when you reach that age, whether it's 18, 21, 25. I'm not saying that there's a magic number where that all works out, but I agree that the difference is like, and I would throw driving aside. I'm not sure that needs to be an adult privilege, but I think we can stick with, I think most states are 16, and I think we can stick with that. But this idea where certain rights and privileges are afforded to you at 18. Oh, and by the way, you can totally, if you're male, you have to sign up for selective service and be eligible for the draft.
Right.
But they don't trust you to go. They don't trust you to buy a gun for yourself. They'll hand you one and say, "Go kill the brown people over there."
Right.
But
you're right.
And in fact, one of the debates that recently came up on the subject, Thomas Massey was like, "Well, let's increase the draft age to 21." And whoever he was talking to in I forget if he's a senator or a congressman, whichever body of Congress it was like, "No, absolutely not." And he's like, "Why not? You're saying that the mind isn't fully formed and these people aren't responsible enough for gun ownership, but it's okay if the military hands them a gun." And he's kind of like, well, hemming and hawing, but the bottom line was, yeah, that's what he thinks.
It's a little hypocritical. Yeah. And honestly, to be involved in politics almost at all, I think that you have to maintain a level of hypocrisy just to, there's the idea that the right is full of nothing but Christians that believe in everything that Jesus said, but then turn around and say, yeah, but we're totally not in favor of handing out, social programs that take care of people and, or within reason, as long as you can prove that you're not abusing it. Not that we have to prove that you are, but that you can prove that you aren't.
Well, look at the, what was the guy that with the foot tap? super anti-gay, and with his political persona, but he's tapping his foot to try to score some ass in a men's bathroom.
Yeah. Well, look, and I realize that there are political candidates that I am going to have on the docket to interview here for this show over the course of the next, 16 to 20 weeks. But we have had individuals on this show that either have been proposed to or have been or know someone that has been involved in a relationship with one Lindsey Graham. And it's one of those scenarios where it's one of those little secrets, but he hates the LGBTQ community to the point where he wants legislation against. I say hate. He doesn't hate them, but his political persona is one that pushes against them to the point where you get that impression.
You run into that on both sides. I mean, AOC is out there buying the most expensive. Why wouldn't you? Now you're suddenly you went from a bartender to a congressman or a woman in her case. You leveled up a bit. Why wouldn't you spend that? Even though she doesn't think there should be any, private businesses or whatever,
Yeah, except that she is now a congresswoman who is being subjected to lobbyists and everything that goes along with that. Look, Lauren Boebert in your state, whom was she actually in a bankruptcy in a bankruptcy situation when she began her run for Congress? And now
I don't remember. I know she was going in and out of court.
Yeah,
having something to do with her restaurant.
But she's worth $41 million or 40 something or $4 million or something like that now. So it's whatever. It's one of those things. Like I said, to be in politics, I think, and to stay out of the hypocrisy, I think it's extremely difficult. And I have to, if somebody comes along and does it, well, then it's the second coming. That's I got to figure that Jesus is here.
Yep.
The last thing that I wanted to maybe hint at that could potentially be a situation, and this is based on the statistics of people that buy firearms generally for the purpose of using them in a crime, generally use them within the first 5 days of those firearms being purchased. And most of the statistics point to the fact that those firearms were purchased within 24 hours of the crime being committed. Is it plausible to think that a mandatory waiting period could potentially bring about a fewer volumes of these potential crimes?
I suppose that's possible, but like I said earlier, the way the system's bogged down, sometimes it takes you 24 hours anyway.
Sure.
So
No.
I'm not sure that it needs to be legislated. It just kind of, the inefficiency already works out.
What if we just called it inefficiency and it took 7 days? That's, I say all this. I am a gun owner. I have never had a situation where I have walked into a gun store and been able to not walk out with the firearm. I think I've bought 3 firearms in my past from legitimate firearm sales stores where I walked in, I had my concealed weapons permit, and I walked out with the firearm. So,
Right.
But I didn't, in my head, and looking back, I don't recall having ideas of my head of the potential of using them in a crime. But in a situation where had there been a mandatory waiting period, I think I would have been fine with that. I don't think I would have had any issue with not, waiting 3 days or 5 days or 7 days.
Well, here's the flip to that, though. Most people, you're talking about people that legally purchase firearms with the intention of using them for crimes.
Right.
I think that's a tiny minority of people that purchase firearms with the intention of using them for crimes. I think most, I'd have to look at the numbers, but my sense is that most people that go, I'm buying this gun to go murder whoever or hold up a liquor store.
Is that not,
they're going down
not a checkbox on the form?
I think they're going down to the corner. I don't think they're going through the process of what the law requires anyways.
Right.
So
I think the flip side.
I mean, that might solve the what I would say is a tiny portion of people that go, I'm going to go to the legitimate gun store to buy a gun to commit a crime. Yeah. And I think that's a tiny percentage of people with those intentions.
Yeah. And I guess the way I look at that, though, is that the flip side is that Uvalde and Parkland and other, well, Parkland, I can't remember where he got his firearms, but that those were legally purchased firearms, both for Buffalo and for Uvalde. The kid,
in the case, at least in the case of the Uvalde kid, I guess he'd been talking about shooting up a school since he was 14.
Exactly.
So it's like a waiting period would have done nothing with him. Some of the other ones, maybe. Like, he obviously was willing to wait at least 4 years. Again, and even with the age requirement, let's say they raised it to 21. I think he would have waited till he was 21. It just so happened that he could do it at 18. And the other thing I want to point out, especially with I don't know about the Buffalo guy, but the Uvalde shooter, a big thing that people don't talk about is this was a dude, not just in a broken home. He had been abandoned by both parents and was being raised by his grandmother. I mean, that's a huge thing. Not just a fatherless kid. He was a completely parentless kid.
Yeah. And obviously a grandmother, his relationship was that he did whatever happened between the two of them. It was definitely a scenario that he didn't care enough about her that he was willing to try and shoot and kill her as well.
Right. Yeah.
There's clearly a need for improvement when it comes to, and I don't know, I guess this would have to fall in the schools, since schools is where most of these people spend most of their time. But you're adding one more thing to counseling systems or psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists or whatnot, that could potentially work in a school system. Again, like I said at the beginning of this, I think that it's a situation that does not have any easy answers, and the answers that seem to come from the political leaders are almost always less than what I would hope to at least hear, because I almost don't even hear conversations. Like, one of the things that I can't remember what it was recently, but somebody who works on Fox News, I think they tweeted that their father had passed away from years of cancer, and I've had plenty of people, but I get numb to this idea that when it comes to situations like that the only thing that we seem to be able to do is thoughts and prayers rather than actually, because at some point there has to be some decision on, okay, so the first week and a half is what we're going to do the thoughts and prayers. After that, then we'll sit down and have a discussion. But honestly, one of the biggest hangups that we have in the United States is that in order to come up with good ideas about how to solve problems, whether it's medicine or gun shootings or things like that, is there needs to be legitimate research into what could potentially resolve this, or what it is that's happening that's causing it. Because in the United States, we can't research that. The government will not. The Congress has already made the decision that based on NRA impact, that we can't use the CDC to research into gun violence, that we can't, the CDC can't look into it at all. Let's allow a government institution that is not beholden to any political party, say the CDC.
Well, but then you get into whatever party happens to be in power is who they're beholden to.
I get that.
They're getting their funding from Congress, and Congress, they're all part of a party.
No,
so.
and I don't disagree. I'll just say I know plenty of people that work, having lived and grown up in Atlanta, I know plenty of people that work for the CDC that outside of the CDC, their political affiliation is Republican. Like they work for a government. So like, under Joe Biden, like other presidents before him, he has adopted a terrible situation, regardless of whatever situation it is. And you want your president to do whatever they can. And in this situation, when it comes to this gun violence situation, I recognize that a lot of people don't want more laws that will inhibit their ability. But I've said this over and over.
And here's kind of my bottom line point of view. This is what irritates me with whenever one of these things happen. For sure, the guilty party needs to be punished. But to go, well, because this happened, we're going to put restrictions on people that have done nothing wrong. That doesn't sit right with me. The other thing too, that with the schools, especially with schools, because there's a federal law that makes them gun free. Well, that's obviously been ineffective. And I'm not saying hand every teacher a gun, but I think there shouldn't be this magic idea that when you walk through a school, suddenly that right goes away. I think the teachers that have gone through the process of getting like a concealed carry permit, I don't see why you don't let them carry. No one the whole idea with concealed carry is no one knows that you're carrying until shit pops off and you have to use it. So just allow them to exercise the rights that they conceivably have outside of that building when they're inside the building.
Yeah. I guess when it comes down to teachers that would want to carry a firearm in school, because based on surveys that I've seen since Uvalde, since Parkland, there is such a low percentage of teachers that actually would be willing to go into a school with a firearm. Listen, I appreciate you being here on the program with me, because I think based on your experience having sold firearms in a legal fashion, because we didn't get into the illegal fashion at all. Sorry about that.
Right. Well, I've never done that.
Yeah, I know.
And then I couldn't answer any of your questions anyway.
No, this is one of those things where I definitely think that there is not an easy solution. And ultimately, I think what it's going to come down to is probably we are going to need some sort of fundamental change in how we approach mental illness and keep track of that, and which ultimately is going to come down to, do we believe that it's a right of the people around others to potentially know or have some sort of a record to indicate that someone does have a mental illness that could potentially lead to this.
That's another thing we didn't really get into, and I don't know that we're at an hour, but I think it was back in the 80s under Reagan, they changed the laws as far as mental institution commitments. It's a lot harder to confine someone to a mental institution that probably should be there.
Yeah.
Now I get you don't want to. This also comes up with red flag laws. You don't want someone to be able to just make a phone call and have someone hauled off to a mental institution, nor do you want someone to just be able to make a phone call and have all their guns taken away, which is where that stuff can be abused. But the flip is, some of these guys may not have been walking around at all if the law still allowed for other people to
yeah, and that's and because of how that system was abused from almost the inception of the United States till the point that mental health was sort of taken out of the responsibility of the federal government to have hospital. I mean, just down the street from here is an asylum, is the building of the leftover remains of a mental health facility that was shut down because of the abuse and the atrocities that went on in it. But I don't look at the atrocities and the abuse that occurred in it as the result of people just wanting to do bad things. It was because the abuse of the people that were just checking family members in. You don't want your aunt who potentially has, something going on that needs help, or you just maybe disagree with her.
Maybe she's in line to inherit some big money from grandma,
right?
And we want to get her out of the way.
All you have to do is just
all kinds of motivations. Yeah,
and especially with women, because we still have doctors that will diagnose women with hysteria. It's that time of the month, so it's hysteria, and here's a mental facility we can just check you into. Yeah, it's right. I think that there definitely needs to be an approach, a better approach to acknowledging mental health in the United States, just as broadly. I mean, across the board. And ultimately, I think that if you figure out how to make sure that people recognize that taking somebody else's life just because is wrong, then that way, that's the point at which do we even need to protect ourselves from other people that have guns?
Right. Yeah.
So listen, I appreciate it. And definitely if you get an opportunity, subscribe to the Man Tools podcast and watch the live stream. The last episode I watched, I guess, Eric was a little late getting in.
Yeah.
Was there a party in the parking lot?
The guys at the auto shop, I guess, finished their workday, and someone showed up with a case of beer. So they were all partying out in the parking lot. It was nuts.
I assumed at some point that you were just going to assume that Eric made his way to the party rather than to the show. That was really entertaining, and the show is entertaining. I
appreciate it, man.
Obviously, you and I have different ideals on how things, but I think that's what's important in this country and around the world, is to be able to have a conversation about these things in order to potentially come up with compromise and solutions. So listen, I want to invite you back anytime, because I would love to have more conversations about other things that we might have a different approach to.
Sure. Yeah. I'd come on anytime, man.
Awesome. Thank you. Trevor Lane, again, Have to Do with the Man Tools podcast, available across the entire podcast spectrum. You can find it virtually everywhere. There are links in the show notes that you can find all those details as well. So make sure you subscribe and check them out as well. What is your Twitter handle again?
It's Man Tools Media.
Man Tools Media.
We scored that pretty much across the board. The exception is it's our second YouTube channel, to be honest. But our YouTube channel is actually Man Tools Pod, because Man Tools Media got nuked.
Was there some denial of something?
No, it was
typically that's what I wind up hearing.
We used to have a Patreon.
Okay.
And this is a little inside baseball.
Oh, okay.
When you put Patreon does not host videos itself.
Right.
So if you put up a video on Patreon, it's actually an unlisted video coming from YouTube.
Okay.
And we end our members only videos with what we call the testosterone booster. It's some scantily clad women. Well, we did one where we talked to Joe Biden. It was a soundboard of just him saying it, and it worked perfectly because it didn't matter which button you hit. It sounded like he was, it sounded like a legitimate response. But because he had been in politics since the 70s, I did a bunch of the 70s Bushes.
Oh, there's a wealth of your on that one.
Even though it was an unlisted YouTube video, which they say is not searchable, apparently YouTube can still search that stuff, and they found it and said that's gratuitous nudity, violates our rules. So, yeah.
Are they aware of what 99% of the internet is? That's
apparently not.
I get that Google's in control a lot, but there's a lot out there.
Yeah, we didn't even get nuked. We didn't even get nuked for anything fun, like saying Alex Jones was right or whatever. But I did want to say before I go, though, that if you want to watch the live show, it's Thursdays at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Other time zones, you can figure it out for yourself. And
that's fair.
It's either on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. We're also on Twitch. We don't really get a whole lot of views on there, but if you like Twitch, you can watch us there. We stream it to all those platforms. So
that sounds great. Yeah, no, and like I said, I've got links that'll be in the show notes that people can check out. And thank you very much again, Trevor. I look forward to future conversations. And like I said, if there's ever anything that you want to discuss, please feel free to reach out. And like like I said, our show is sometimes very zoo crew, but today we had it under control.
So, hell yeah, man! I appreciate it.
Thank you, Trevor. Again, the Man Tools podcast and live stream available on almost all the podcast spectrum. So check them out. Yeah. Thank you very much. As always, thank you, Neek the Geek, engineer and producer, owner and operator of GOT Sound Studio. Check out details on how you can utilize his talent and production expertise at gotsoundstudio.com. Thanks to Muff the Producer. You can follow him on Instagram at Muff the Producer. Thanks to Shiana Rivers for our intro and outro. Follow her podcast, Who You Callin' Holistic. As well, thanks to Trent Clark, aka DJ Lonzo, currently entertaining the main course in Columbia, South Carolina. Make sure to go by, have a good time. You can contact Trent for all your entertainment needs. Trent at theallaboutnothing.com and on Instagram at TheRealDJLonzo or by phone 803-262-7982. If you enjoy the show, consider becoming a patron by visiting our website and clicking on the link at the top of the browser. That will take you over to our Patreon page. You can find details on how you become a supporter. You can check out our benefits there or just consider a donation so that we can continue to bring you this nonsense. We enjoy doing it. We enjoy you enjoying it. As always, you can follow us on Facebook. Just search for All About Nothing US, on Twitter and Instagram at AAN_pod, or find links to all of our social media and available podcast platforms by visiting theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be heard on the show, you may call and leave us a message, 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is too far apart, you can fill that time by checking out our partner podcasts. Zach and I host What the Pod Was That with Carrie Simmons, available on most of your podcast platforms. You can visit whatthepodwasthat.com for links and details. Carrie and Chrissy host Status Macabre on most of the podcast platforms as well. Find details at statusmacabre.com. As well, you can check out our own DJ Lonzo's Top 5, hosted by Trent Clark, available on most of your podcast listening platforms. That'll do it for this week's episode, the All About Nothing podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Check us out next week. We've got several candidates for the South Carolina offices coming up that should be good conversations, because we're going to hold them to the same questions that we would hold the Republicans. Democrats and Republicans all welcome on the show. So check it out. TheAllAboutNothing.com for details and links to our media and anything else you want to find. It's all right there. Thank you very much. I'm Barrett Gruber. We'll be back next week.
This The All About Nothing podcast is recorded live from the Maddie Johnson podcast studio at GOT Sound Studio in Columbia, South Carolina. The All About Nothing podcast is produced and engineered by Neek the Geek, owner and operator of GOT Sound Studio. To support the show, please visit theallaboutnothing.com for links to social media, merchandise, and more. Become a patron of the show by following the Patreon link at the top of our page. The All About Nothing podcast is an entertainment product of Barrett Gruber. Special thanks to Zach King, Trent Clark, Muff the Producer, Neek the Geek, and you, our listeners. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share. If you're on YouTube, please hit the like button and the notification bell. Thank you for listening.